We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's October 30th here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yoon, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Jessica Dainang.
Happy Monday, everyone.
Happy Monday, and Park Ki-hoon.
Thanks for having me.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Our first story. American actor Matthew Perry, best known for playing Chandler Bing in the 90s sitcom Friends, was found dead at his home on Saturday. Authorities did not cite a cause of death, but identified no sign of foul play. What we know so far was that Perry was found dead in his hot tub. Perry was only 54 years old. And soon after news broke out, fans over the world shared their condolences online. And moving on, the Asian Para Games held in Hangzhou, China wrapped up on Saturday. Team Korea ranked fourth with a total of 30 gold, 33 silver, and 40 bronze medals. This year's Asian Paralympics was dominated by China, which hauled over 500 medals. Second was Iran, and third was Japan. And last but not least, one of the hottest headlines in Korea at the moment is the romance scam that two-time Olympic fencing medalist Nam Hyun-hee has been caught up in. It all started last week when Nam told the press that she had decided to get married to a third-generation skion of the Paradise Hotel and Casino conglomerate. But as soon as Nam revealed her fiancé to the public, many reached out to her, claiming that he was in fact a fraudster. Now here's some claims that actually pushed two-time Olympic fencing medalist Nam Hyun-hee to call off her marriage in just a few days later, and even report her former fiancé to the police over stalking charges. One, her husband-to-be turned out to be a biological woman, and Nam later told media that she knew Chun was a transgender man, but said she had been gaslighted into thinking that Chun had gone through a sex change operation. Chun reportedly made the Olympian think that she was pregnant by using tampered pregnancy tests. Now, the second claim that Nam was going through is that her ex-fiancé Chun Chong-jo had no relations with the Paradise conglomerate. Also, Chun's background story turned out to be completely fabricated. Chun claimed to have been the illegitimate son of Paradise Group, born out of wedlock, and also claimed to have been a professional horse rider who had lived a long time in the States after attending NYU. But in reality, Chun had lived most of their life in Korea and was in fact sentenced multiple times over fraud. And day after day, we're seeing more accusations pile up against Chun Chong-jo. We're also seeing more of the public wonder how this fencing medalist Nam could have been so gullible. Now here at the studio, starting with you, Ki-hoon, what did you think about this story?
Oh, I am 실례예요. Not. I think this story seems to get more hilarious day by day. She or he is only 27 and has already brainwashed so many naive people, but which seems kind of amazing and talented on one side, but I kind of read into it as well. Chun's father is also a fraudster on the run after leeching off millions of dollars from women through his romance scam. So obviously she's learned it from her dad, which is not a surprise. But I think all eyes of the public are on this kind of funny, incident. But I just hope that this is just not a cover-up of other more important issues happening right now.
I think a lot of people in our generation think that every single time we see baffling news like this, some have conspiracy theories as to whether we're actually looking at what's the most important thing right now. And also to explain your inside joke on I am 실례예요. As I told you before, Chun Chong-jo built up his whole background story saying that she or he lived abroad in New York and he's not that fluent in Korean, but then there's this meme now where the message he sent to his friends or stuff, it shows he can't speak fluent Korean, and that's why he used mixed Korean with English, and that's why people are making memes out of it. So you can tell that a lot of people from our generation are using this incident to make funny memes, and they are putting a lot of attention to it. But what are your thoughts on that?
It reminded me of a Netflix series that is on about this woman who sort of built her identity, just like you said, as a German sort of, billionaire, and actually people all fell into it. So I think the one interesting thing about this news is the psychological game that people play for vulnerable people. But other than that, I would like to be a little bit honest and say, while it is a big issue and there's a lot of fraudulent and criminal cases that are involved, it's really a relationship issue between the two people. And I think there's so much media attention that is being paid right now. So I hope this does not sway us from a more important issue, much like the news generation topic that we will be covering today.
And speaking of our topic of the day, let's switch on to what we'll be discussing on this Monday. If you take a look at the screen, you'll find out. We're going to go into our main discussion for the day because it's been a full year since the tragic Itaewon Crowd tragedy, and my AI voice secretary will explain what we went through this time last year.
It was a tragedy nobody expected. A tragedy that killed 159 people. Last year on October 29th, thousands of people, mostly those in their 20s, went out to one of the capital's most popular nightlife spots, Itaewon, to enjoy the Halloween festivities. Just after 10 p.m., the chaos started. Many were jam-packed in narrow alleyways, only about 4 meters wide on their way to the next bar or club. Witnesses recall how the large crowd suddenly collapsed like dominoes. In the process, people toppled on one another, suffocating. Eventually, 159 people died, including 26 foreigners. Another 196 were injured. Their families and friends have been scarred for life.
1 year ago yesterday, we witnessed a tragedy that took the lives of many people from our generations. Officials had estimated 100,000 people to pack the narrow alleyways of Itaewon, which is only around 4 meters wide. And that's because last year was the first virtually unrestricted Halloween in 3 years. Now, though I wasn't there on the day of, I was there the next day for a live cross, and I can tell you, it was quite devastating. Now, do you recall that night, and if so, how?
It still gives me goosebumps thinking about that night. But on that night, I was actually in my neighborhood just with my friend, and I got a text from my other friend. She sent me a clip of what was happening at that time in Itaewon. And at first I thought it was just some kind of some fun event that people were doing in costumes because it was Halloween. But then the next moment, it was all over the news channel, and then I thought, wow, this really happened. And then, just like you, because I work in the news department, it didn't really kick in until the next day when I started being updated, listening, and just watching all those, those unfortunate clips. To be honest, this should never have happened, but it has, and it has left a big scar to all Korean citizens and the society and the country. And it's something that should never be overlooked in the coming years.
For sure. What about you, Cheska? How do you remember that night?
So I was actually in LA, so my time zone was flipped. And I remember because my American neighbor brought this article and said, hey, there's a stampede. She used the word stampede, and I've never heard that word before. It's just stampede that was happening in Korea. And I know the exact area, like Itaewon area, the district and the streets. And at first I thought it was something like, you know how we have a very crowded subway? Yeah. So, it's after COVID, so maybe they had a record number of visitors and maybe some incidents happened. And then the death toll started coming in. And I just remember being, completely overwhelmed. And later I found out that actually one of my college classmates was on the scene, and she unfortunately passed away. And while I never knew her personally, it just hit me a lot different because not only do I know the exact street and the area, it's only like 10 minutes away from where I live, but the fact that someone that I might have known or that I somehow crossed paths with on a college ground was on the scene, my age, passing away, I think it just hit young people differently. Yeah.
For sure, and my deepest condolences to your friend and her family. I think a lot of us could relate because every Halloween in Korea, though it's not a Korean traditional holiday, I think a lot of people are very excited to go out to the streets and party because it is a freebie night where you go with your friends and go to all these hottest nightclub districts. But then again, nobody really expected to see this ever happen. And officials have braced themselves to prevent anything like this tragedy from ever happening again this year. That's why we've seen thousands of police dispatched the most popular nightlife districts in the capital where people would go to enjoy Halloween festivities. So why don't you guys walk us through how this year's Halloween scene was like compared to last?
Sure, I think I can talk a little bit about Itaewon. There was definitely a lot of people who were there to commemorate the tragedy. And I think just between my friends friends, I think it was a lot calmer and quieter. Not many people were going out, and the government and police have taken measures to prevent further incidents from happening. So if we take a look at the screen, and one of the measures that was actually implemented was they decided to have a total of 909 CCTVs to be installed around Seoul so that it can monitor. And it sends an alert system for about 150 people in an area of about 350 meters squares. So that is about a people density of 0.3 people every meter square. And now, while I'm very glad there are measures being implemented and taken to prevent further tragedy, you know, it's always so sad that only after a tragedy happens, people do start to take measures and, you know, preventionary, cautionary measures too, much like what happened in Seoul incident, right? Only after a tragic incident happens, then people, the crowd kind of comes together and tries to prevent it from happening. So I hope it serves as a lesson for these kind of things to never happen again.
For sure. And this year around, I'm well aware that Itaewon wasn't as bustling compared to last year, right?
Yes, unlike the quiet atmosphere in Itaewon that Jessica just talked about, places like Hongdae and Gangnam were a little different, especially Hongdae in the main streets. They were reported to be very crowded. It was very crowded with bars and restaurants all packed, with long queues of many youngsters lining up to get into nightclubs. But luckily, you know, there were enough district police officers on the scene, setting up barricades, as you can see on the screen, with people, you know, still dressed up. And they were controlling the direction and the density of people on foot. So it was very, very safe. So up until now, there have been no reports of any crowd-related accidents, which is a very positive and a good sign. And that local authorities are much more alert on days of festivals like Halloween that we experienced over the weekend.
And it's really nice to see stronger preparatory measures this time around. We didn't see any deaths or casualties happen for Halloween, but there were many debates in regards to whether it's actually appropriate to celebrate Halloween. So here in the studio, it'd be great if you guys can tell us a bit more about the surrounding arguments and where you two personally stand on this matter.
You know, that's a very valid question. Some people, because Halloween is not an official holiday, many are saying, you know, we should completely abolish it and not celebrate it because it only causes, you know, mishaps and tragedy. Personally, I'm a little bit torn because while I understand that there are people who, you know, want to still commemorate and, you know, remember the day as a tragic incident, just because an accident happened on a day, shutting it down, I don't think actually resolves what happened. So instead of, you know, everybody sort of rallying up and say, oh, we should completely shut down the day, I think what's more important is just because it happened on Halloween doesn't mean it's going to happen again on Halloween. It could happen on our subway trip.
Exactly.
It can happen anywhere when there is an unregulated area and people aren't vigilant enough, people aren't careful enough, and people get overwhelmed. So I don't think it's a matter of Halloween, but more of what other things that could happen that we're ignoring until a tragic incident
And
happens.
I completely agree. I hope people don't go out and bash people for going out to hang out on Halloween because, as you mentioned, it just happened to be on Halloween.
Exactly.
It's something that we should be vigilant about on a daily basis. Now, what about you, Kyun?
I'd like to talk a little more on behalf of small shop and restaurant owners, especially around that Itaewon area. More shops have reportedly closed down compared to COVID lockdowns, and the overall sales are far from recovery margin. And, you know, many business owners are in debt, you know, close to shutting down, or even have already closed their businesses. So it seems a little unfortunate and unfair in some sense. Look, it's only right to commemorate this day, but completely erasing this day and not celebrating forever doesn't seem like the correct way to deal with it. So, you know, let's say hypothetically, if something bad or tragic happens on Christmas Day, should we not celebrate it from the following year?
That's a
very
good analogy.
questionable. Yeah.
And I think another argument was the people who are living need to live. You know, that is hard, but I think that is also true because we are seeing a lot of livelihoods still affected from the Itaewon tragedy, especially as you mentioned in the businesses near the alleyway. Now, despite debates, one argument seemed to be posing some sort of middle ground, and that popular opinion was learning from past mistakes by finding the root of the problem and making sure we know how to cope after a national tragedy like this, and this is still an ongoing task. That's why we asked our viewers if they've ever experienced a national tragedy like us here in Korea and how they've coped with it since, or if they saw any measures come forth that helped the country as a whole move on. Take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of them had to say. Let's start with Tiras Bell. The Flint, Michigan water crisis comes to mind. It lasted for 5 years where the residents were exposed to high concentrations of lead in their water. As a result, stricter water quality standards were imposed. Hannah said the 2019 Kyoto animation arson attack was a devastating loss for the anime industry around the world, claiming the lives of talented creators and destroying irreplaceable work. It's a stark reminder of the importance of mental health awareness, workplace safety, and vigilance against violence. Bradley Denny said in the U.S., we must take our shoes off at the airport because of a shoe bomb one time. And the reason why I think that there's just so much debate in the first place is also because there's remnant trauma. An integral part of moving on is first acknowledging that incidents, whether like be the Itaewon Crowd tragedy or all the different national, global events that are happening around the world, it can definitely cause trauma. Then the next step is learning how to treat it. That's why we're going to include a mental health expert in our talks to find out just how to do that. We're now going to talk to Jeannie Chung, a mental health expert specializing in grief and trauma. She's also been actively trying to educate people on the importance of taking care of your mind as much as your body. Great to have you here with us, Jeannie.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Jeannie, so I think I want to focus this part of our discussion on defining trauma. Could you first define it, and how would someone know that they actually are going through trauma?
Trauma is an emotional response to, I would say, a horrific, terrible, distressing event in one's life. Example of the Itaewon tragedy. When they know, I always say that you guys are the expert of yourselves. So you don't necessarily need a mental health expert like myself to tell you that you're traumatized, because trauma can be experienced individually by anybody. What I mean by that is it can have a unique experience. Just because there's a national disaster does not mean we all experience it the same way. Some folks will not experience it right away, like the symptoms. Some people experience it years later. So you know you're feeling traumatized, or there's something traumatic that you're experiencing by the distressful symptoms you're feeling, or if it's hindering your daily functioning. That's pretty much those obvious ones. And obviously there's other symptoms that a professional can help you through.
Then once you recognize that you have trauma, what is one, effective process or way that you can sort of treat or deal with your trauma?
Well, I'm going to say this, of course, as a therapist and a mental health expert, it is processing through that trauma. It is a process, meaning talking it through, discussing what you're feeling. And would be, I would say, in therapy. Getting that help that you need, especially, is critical immediately following a traumatic event. So again, you don't need a professional to say you need help. If you're feeling distressed, can't sleep, anxious, fearful, depressed, following an incident that you experienced that is terrible and horrific, then go seek somebody that you can speak to, process those thoughts, share those emotions in a safe space. And that is actually a big part of tackling that trauma early on.
Jeannie, do you think South Korea has been doing a good job when it comes to helping people with trauma from the Itaewon Crush tragedy, and what was done well and what needs more work?
So again, that's a little bit sensitive because I don't live in Korean society, but here's what I've seen and observed, actually talking a lot of folks, especially in the younger generation. What I wanted to see happen was an immediate, I would say, coming in and providing all those resources from the get-go. I didn't necessarily see that, and that is actually very critical. It can actually turn into post-traumatic stress. Not everyone experiences PTSD, by the way, after a trauma. That critical period of perhaps a week to 2 weeks is very important to get the help you need, to get the attention you need. And so I think the very important thing, I'm going to say this, is folks need to feel validated. They need to feel seen. They need to feel heard. So that is the families, the victims' families, survivors, people that witnesses, friends of victims need to feel like, hey, you're hearing me out. I have this burden, the grief that I'm experiencing, the distress. Can you hear me? Can you commemorate? Can you acknowledge that this was a horrific tragedy? Just say it. So it does not have to be complex. A solution at the very end of the day is hearing folks out and being like, you're right. This happened. This was terrible. I'm grieving with you. Tell me what we can do. The solutions will come, but hear them out and actually acknowledge that this was such a terrible event. It's going to take time to heal, not just 1 year, who knows, years later. And I think that's what I'm seeing lacking, that empathy and compassion of acknowledging how bad this was.
I completely agree. And in order for us to be empathizing, I think we need more places where we actually discuss it. It needs to be discussed more, and people need to feel open and comfortable enough to acknowledge that. Thank you so much, Jeannie. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would like to point out, I do think we are going in the right step in the right direction, given that yesterday at Itaewon we saw a lot of commemorative events also in City Hall. So the nation is definitely acknowledged that this could be a very traumatic scar in our generation and just for our nation as a whole. But what do you think still needs to be done, Cheska?
I think Jeannie said it perfectly. I think at the moment what we really need is not pointing fingers to blame someone, but compassion and empathy. You know, people need to be heard, people need to be validated, people need to be commemorated. And even though we didn't go through it, some people didn't go through it, just being there and listening to people I think is very important.
Very briefly, do you have anything you'd like to add on, Kim?
I think just moving forward, more citizens, including ourselves, need to be a bit more conscious of personal safety, especially when we go to crowded places. So being a bit more educated and just be a bit more aware of our surroundings will definitely prevent any of these kind of tragedies from happening.
And hopefully our episode really posed those answers for you, and you can take these guys' suggestions right here on better dealing with anything, whether it be trauma or just happening with your daily life, just talking about it, acknowledging that you could be heard, and just facilitating better discussions is the key today. In the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska Dainha.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
And Park Ki-hoon.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.